Her sister disappeared hours before the wedding. So Emily walked down the aisle, wearing her name, never expecting he'd recognize the lie without ever seeing her. No one asked Emily Dawson if she wanted to be a bride that day. They didn't ask if her heart was steady, if her hands were ready to carry the weight of vows meant for someone else, or if she could walk down an aisle with a name that wasn't hers stitched into every detail. What mattered was that her sister Vanessa was gone and the groom was already waiting at the altar. "Now!" her mother barked, yanking Emily's wrist toward the shimmering white gown that hung like a noose made of silk and lace. "You will do this. You owe this family." The room was too small, the mirrors too tall, the perfume in the air too heavy. It choked her. A knock came from the door twice, then louder, more frantic. "The coordinator says 5 minutes," someone shouted through the thick oak. Emily stood frozen, still in jeans and a faded t-shirt, her face pale. But her mother, Catherine Dawson, didn't falter. She shoved the dress into Emily's arms, her face sharp, proud, unfeeling. "Vanessa left again. She's not coming back." "Do you understand what that means?" Emily did. It meant ruin. For their name. For their money. For their place in a society that only smiled at perfection. Vanessa was supposed to marry Nathaniel, a reclusive tech magnate, young, wealthy, powerful, and blind. For 6 months, Vanessa had kept up the charade, the phone calls, the carefully crafted persona. But when it came time to show up in person, in front of press and politicians, candlelight and cameras, Vanessa vanished. Just like she always did when reality crept too close. So now the role fell to Emily. "You've been practicing her voice." "You know everything," Catherine said, tugging at Emily's hair, twisting it into the same sleek bun Vanessa wore. "Your perfume is hers. The tone, the mannerisms, you'll pass." "He won't know. He doesn't see." "But he feels," Emily whispered. Her mother stopped. "What did you say?" "Nothing." It wasn't worth arguing. Not with Catherine Dawson. Not with her sister standing smug at the door, arms folded, offering nothing but contempt. "You always wanted to be the pretty one," Vanessa sneered. "Now's your chance to wear the dress. Congratulations." Emily looked at her sister. Her heart didn't ache. It didn't even break. It just went quiet. Like a room where someone had turned off all the lights. Minutes later, she stood outside the cathedral, veil tugged low over her face, gown zipped and pinned in haste. Cameras flashed beyond the glass doors. A low hum of whispered anticipation floated through the stained glass windows. Her name had been legally swapped on the documents that morning. Emily Dawson was about to marry a man who thought he was marrying Vanessa. Nathaniel Hale stood at the altar like a statue carved from stillness. He wore a black tuxedo, elegant and precise. His eyes, pale grey and unseeing, remained slightly lowered as if listening. And perhaps he was. Emily's heart pounded so hard she was sure he could hear it. She stepped into the aisle, each footstep echoing like a sentence passed. The candles flickered as she passed. The guests rose, and the man at the end of the aisle turned his head ever so slightly. "Emily Dawson," the minister's voice rang out gently. "Do you take Nathaniel Hale to be your lawfully wedded husband, in love, honor, and duty? Until death do you part?" The pause that followed was too long. She could feel her mother's stare burn into the back of her skull from the front pew. She could sense Vanessa's smirk even without turning around. Her voice cracked. "I do!" Applause, flashbulbs. The click of headlines being written before the first kiss was even given. Nathaniel, still silent, reached out and gently touched her arm. He leaned in slightly. "You're trembling," he said softly. "Are you afraid?" Emily swallowed hard. "No." "Are you lying?" The words pierced her like a pin through fabric. Before she could respond, the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and with that, it was done. That night, Emily sat beside her new husband in the back of a Rolls-Royce Phantom as it wound its way through quiet, tree-lined streets toward the Hale estate. She didn't look at him, he didn't speak, but she knew he was listening. To her breathing, the nervous rustle of silk, the twitch of her fingers. He was blind. But Emily had never felt more seen in her life. The Hale estate was breathtaking and empty. Emily stood just inside the grand foyer, clutching the hem of her gown as the front doors closed quietly behind her. The sound echoed like a soft warning through the high-ceilinged hall. Marble floors stretched endlessly beneath her feet. Walls adorned with black and white artwork, not a single portrait, not a trace of warmth. No music, no clinking glasses, no reception. Just silence. Nathaniel Hale stood beside her, calm and still, like he had been carved from that silence. He offered no toast. No smile, no welcome speech. Instead, he gently rested his hand on her back and guided her toward the dining room. There, a long table stretched like a road between two porcelain plates. No candles, no centerpiece. Just white linen and silver cutlery arranged with perfect precision. Emily sat across from him, heart pounding. Nathaniel took his seat, folding his hands in his lap. Then finally he spoke. "Your voice," he said. "It's different." Emily froze. Her fingers twitched around the napkin in her lap. "Different? How?" she asked, her tone carefully measured. "Softer. Slower, a slight rasp at the end of your words." He tilted his head toward her. She didn't have that. Emily felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Maybe I'm just tired," she offered. "It's been a long day." He nodded once, then inhaled slowly through his nose, like the air itself had a scent worth studying. "And the perfume? You're wearing a different one." Emily's mouth went dry. "I forgot to put on the usual." Nathaniel said nothing for a moment. His face betrayed no anger, no suspicion, but the space between them felt heavier now, charged. Dinner arrived, brought by a silent staff Emily hadn't even noticed. A perfectly plated dish she couldn't name, let alone taste. She forced down each bite. Nathaniel ate slowly, deliberately, every motion precise, controlled. When she reached for her water, he spoke again. "Do you remember our first phone call?" Emily's hand stopped mid-air. He continued. "I told you about Paris, the rain, the hotel I stayed in when I lost my sight." "You told me about your cello." Emily's mind scrambled. That wasn't her. That had to be Vanessa. "Right," she replied quickly. "I said I wanted to open a bookstore by the lake." Nathaniel set his fork down. "No," he said gently. She never said that. Emily stared at her plate. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick. Like fog in the lungs. Nathaniel leaned back slightly, folding his napkin. "It's fine," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I have a very good memory, sometimes too good." Emily said nothing. She didn't look up. She didn't know what he meant by too good, but something in her stomach turned. Not fear of being caught, fear of being known. That night, she entered the bedroom on the west side of the estate. It was vast and cold, with soft lighting and high windows. The bed had 2 pillows. She laid on the far edge, her body stiff beneath the covers. Nathaniel lay beside her, turned away. Neither of them spoke. The only sound was the wind whispering through the slightly open window and the quiet rhythm of their breathing. Then, in the darkness, his voice came, low, calm, direct. "I don't need eyes to recognize a lie." Emily's breath caught. He didn't say her name. Didn't accuse her. But the words settled in her chest like a weight. She turned her face to the ceiling, willing the tears not to fall. What terrified her wasn't the idea of being found out. What terrified her was the possibility that Nathaniel already knew, and he was waiting for her to say it first. In the morning, Emily rose early. The sunlight spilled through the kitchen windows in slanted streaks. The staff moved around her in silence, careful and polite. She barely touched her coffee. Nathaniel entered just after sunrise, guided by instinct rather than sight. He sat at the breakfast table, folding his hands exactly as he had the night before.
Emily poured his tea. 2 sugars, she said softly. 3, he corrected.
She winced. Sorry. He didn't respond, but when she turned to leave the room, his voice stopped her. Emily. Her heart dropped. No one had used that name in weeks, not since her mother had erased it from the marriage license. She turned slowly. Yes? Nathaniel faced her, blind eyes open but steady. You walk lighter than she did. Emily swallowed hard. I'll try to remember that. He gave the faintest smile, not kind, not cruel. Just knowing. Emily stood there for a moment longer, unsure of what to say, unsure of whether she'd been warned or invited. Then she walked away. And in that house of muted color and whispered truths, she knew one thing for certain. Nathaniel Hale didn't need eyes to see. He was already watching her, with every breath she took. In the days that followed, Emily moved through the Hale estate like a ghost in borrowed skin. She rose early, before the staff stirred, and drifted silently from room to room, memorizing details, correcting habits, trying to predict what Vanessa would have done or said. Every teacup she touched, every phrase she spoke, felt like a performance staged for an audience of one. But Nathaniel Hale was not an easy man to deceive. He never raised his voice, never asked the questions outright, but he watched her in his own way through sound, rhythm, and silence. And that kind of observation was far more dangerous than sight. Each time Emily spoke, she felt him listening, not just to her words, but to the tremor in her breath, the pause between her sentences, the gentle faltering of someone not used to being noticed. She tried to tell herself this would only last a short while, a week, maybe 2, just long enough for the press to forget, for the money to settle, for her mother to find a way out. But each time she thought of walking away, she remembered the sound of Nathaniel's voice when he said her name. Emily, not Vanessa. He knew, or he was guessing, or worse, he was waiting. One morning, she entered the library to find him standing near the piano, fingertips grazing the keys. You play? She asked softly. Nathaniel turned toward her, his expression unreadable. No, he said, not anymore. What happened? I used to play by memory, he replied, but after I lost my sight, it felt dishonest. Like chasing a sound I could no longer control. Emily stepped closer. Maybe that's not dishonesty. Maybe that's resilience. He tilted his head at her. That doesn't sound like something Vanessa would say. The words hit her squarely in the chest. Emily smiled faintly. She has more polished answers. He murmured. And you have more honest ones. Silence bloomed between them. For the first time, Emily didn't try to fill it. She stood near him, their distance shrinking not by steps, but by shared quiet. That night, while seated across from each other at dinner, Nathaniel asked, "What does the garden look like today?" Emily blinked. "Why do you ask?" "I like to imagine it," he said, "but only when the descriptions are true." She set her fork down. The lavender is starting to droop. The daisies are still hanging on. The hydrangeas are struggling too much sun. No orchids. Her throat caught. Not today. He nodded slowly. Vanessa used to speak of orchids. A lot. Emily looked away. I think today the other flowers deserve to be seen. Nathaniel's lips curled just slightly. Not in amusement, but in understanding. You know, he said, there's something different about your silence. She raised her eyes to meet his blind gaze. What do you mean? It doesn't demand anything. It just exists. Emily didn't know what to say to that. So for once, she let the silence speak for her. Later that evening, she found herself standing in front of the mirror in the guest bathroom. Her reflection startled her, not because she looked different, but because she didn't. There was no Vanessa in her eyes anymore. No practiced poise, just a woman slowly forgetting how to pretend. And maybe, just maybe, remembering how to feel. She took off the perfume. She let her hair fall loose. And she walked to the study, the one no one entered, the one Nathaniel never spoke of. She dusted the shelves, opened the curtains, rearranged the books alphabetically, something she'd done in her childhood room when she needed to feel control over chaos. The door creaked open behind her. Emily turned, heart hammering. Nathaniel stood in the doorway. He didn't ask what she was doing. He simply stepped inside and ran his fingers along the desk's edge. "She never came in here," he said quietly. Emily's hands froze. "I thought it could use some air." Vanessa thought it was depressing. "I think it's peaceful," she whispered. He nodded once, then left without another word. But his silence was different now. Not distant. Not cold, just unsure. That night, Emily sat beside him in the living room, reading aloud from a paperback she'd found tucked between two dusty hardcovers. It wasn't classic literature. It wasn't anything Vanessa would have chosen. It was simple. Warm. Human. When she stopped reading, Nathaniel remained still, his head tilted slightly. Then finally he said, "Your voice. It's warmer now." Emily's pulse quickened. "The way you touch me. The way you move in a room. Even your silence feels different." She couldn't respond. Her chest was too tight. Nathaniel turned toward her, though his eyes could not see. "If you're someone else," he said softly, "I think I might like her more." And with that, he stood, leaving Emily alone with the quiet hum of realization. Her mask was slipping, and she wasn't sure she wanted to put it back on. The afternoon sun filtered through sheer curtains, casting golden streaks across the polished floor of the Hale estate. Emily sat in the study she had quietly reclaimed. The room had once been closed off, silent, untouched. Now it held something more than dust. It held her presence. She hadn't planned to make it her space. She wasn't supposed to be here long enough to claim anything, but in the absence of Vanessa's perfume, of her mother's voice, and of the pressure to keep performing, Emily had found herself lingering longer each day. She folded the last blanket, realigned the books she'd adjusted earlier in the week, and stood back to admire the subtle changes. Nothing bold, nothing loud, but everything she touched held warmth. A kind of quiet signature, hers alone. The moment shattered with the sharp echo of the front door swinging open. She stiffened. Two sets of heels clacked against the marble tile. No announcement, no hesitation. They had come back. Emily stepped into the hallway just as Vanessa Dawson swept into view, followed closely by Catherine, their mother, whose eyes scanned the house like a general surveying enemy territory. Vanessa was immaculate tailored suit, manicured nails, a smirk painted perfectly in place. "Well," she said coolly, "looks like someone got comfortable." Catherine didn't greet Emily. She didn't even blink. "We need to talk," she said simply, already walking toward the study. Emily followed them inside, her heart thudding in her chest. Her room suddenly felt fragile, exposed. Vanessa strolled around like she owned the space. Her fingers trailed across the desk. She picked up a book Emily had been reading and dropped it with a dull thud back onto the wood. "You're getting a little too deep into character, don't you think?" Vanessa's voice was casual, but laced with warning. Emily said nothing. "The staff say you make breakfast for him," Vanessa continued, "that you take walks with him, read to him, sleep in the same bed." She gave a dry laugh. "Seriously, Em, dial it back. Did you forget who you're supposed to be pretending to be?" "I'm not pretending anymore," Emily said softly. Catherine's gaze snapped toward her, icy and unforgiving. "You don't belong here," she said coldly.
He belongs to this family, to Vanessa. Emily met her mother's stare, something steady flickering in her chest. He doesn't belong to anyone. Vanessa stepped closer, her voice dropping.
He doesn't know who you are. You think he'll still want you after he finds out? After he realizes you've been lying to his face, sleeping next to him with my name on your lips? Emily's voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. I never lied to his heart. Silence blanketed the room. Catherine folded her arms. You're playing with fire, she said, and when this ends, when he ends it, you'll have nothing. No name, no home, no protection. Emily felt her fingers tighten against her side, but for the first time she didn't shrink. I never had any of those things to begin with, she said quietly. Vanessa scoffed. Oh, please. This isn't some redemption story, Em. This is a farce. You're a placeholder. He loves me. He just doesn't know it yet. Emily stepped back, but her eyes stayed locked on her sister's. If he ever finds out and walks away, I'll still know I did the right thing. Because I never treated him like a transaction. For a brief second, Vanessa's expression faltered. Then Catherine stepped forward. Don't fool yourself into thinking this is love. You're borrowing a role that was never meant for you. And when we take it back, you won't have the right to cry. She turned to leave, her heels striking the floor like thunder. Vanessa followed, but not before casting one last glance at Emily. It wasn't anger. It was fear. Fear that despite everything, despite the name, the plan, the lies, Emily had become something neither of them had ever expected. Real. They were gone as suddenly as they had come. The front door closed behind them like a final threat. Emily stood in the hallway, breathing slowly, steadying the storm inside her. She had just fought back. She had never fought back before, and strangely she wasn't afraid. That night, she stood on the back veranda, wrapped in a sweater Nathaniel had once left draped across a chair. The sunset was pale, fading gently behind tall hedges and swaying branches. She hugged her knees to her chest. The garden was quiet, but her mind wasn't. Her mother's words echoed like a spell still trying to bind her. You don't get to love. Emily buried her face in her arms. Tears didn't fall in floods. They came slowly, each one heavy like grief and relief at once. Behind her, soft footsteps. She didn't turn, she didn't need to. Nathaniel sat beside her, not too close, not too far. He didn't speak, but the silence was full. After a long moment, his voice came, gentle, low. Have you ever wished you were someone else? Emily looked up, startled. Yes, she whispered. Every day? He asked. She nodded. Nathaniel reached out, his hand finding hers, not to hold, just to touch, like he needed to know she was really there. If one day I get to see you, he said, voice trembling, I'm afraid I won't want to look away. Emily's breath hitched. She turned toward him not for answers, but for something deeper. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't want to disappear anymore. The morning air was crisp. Emily stood by the kitchen window, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. Outside, the garden glowed under a quiet sun. The lavender had faded, and the last of the summer daisies bowed gently in the breeze. Autumn was settling in. So was something else. Something she couldn't name, a quiet dread. Behind her, footsteps approached, steady, familiar. Nathaniel. He entered without needing a guide. He never did. His memory of the house was perfect, his awareness sharper than anyone she'd ever known. You're quiet today, he said softly. Emily smiled faintly. I've been thinking. About? She hesitated. Seasons. How things change, even when you wish they wouldn't. He nodded slowly. or when you're not ready. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table. The kind of quiet that stretched between them now wasn't cold. It was honest, a space where two people didn't need to pretend. Nathaniel stirred his tea once, then set the spoon aside. His fingers drummed lightly on the ceramic. "I need to tell you something," he said finally. Emily's heart paused. He didn't wait. "There's a doctor in Switzerland, a specialist. They've been developing a surgical procedure, experimental, with risks, but the potential for restored vision is real." The words landed like stone in her chest. She didn't speak, couldn't. "I've been considering it for a while," he continued, "but I didn't want to go through with it alone. Now, I feel like I shouldn't keep waiting." Emily's throat tightened. "That's amazing." Nathaniel's face was calm, but his hands, those steady, careful hands, trembled slightly as they rested near his teacup. "What scares me isn't the surgery," he said. "It's what comes after." "What do you mean?" "I'm afraid that when I open my eyes again, the world won't match what I've imagined." His voice lowered. "I'm afraid I'll see something or someone and wish I hadn't." Emily stared at him. She wanted to scream, to say, "I'm not her," to say, "You've already seen me, just not with your eyes," but her lips wouldn't move. Instead, she reached across the table and placed her hand gently over his. He didn't pull away, and she didn't let go. That night, she lay awake in bed beside him. Nathaniel faced away, his breathing deep, steady, but not asleep. Emily stared at the ceiling, heart racing. She imagined what he might see after the surgery. Would he be disappointed? Would he look at her and realize she wasn't Vanessa? Would he hate her for what she'd done? The fear coiled tighter with each passing hour, but buried beneath it was something worse. A hope she didn't dare admit, a fragile, flickering wish that maybe, just maybe, if he opened his eyes, he'd choose her anyway. A week later, they flew to Zurich. The trip was quiet, no press, no family. Just the two of them and an agreement not to speak of what would happen if it worked. Emily stayed by his side through the pre-op tests, the consultations, the long silences as he lay in the hospital bed beneath clean white sheets and dim light. She brought him books. She read aloud, he listened, but neither of them spoke about the truth sitting between them like a sealed envelope. The morning of the surgery arrived wrapped in fog. Emily stood by the window of his hospital room, hands clasped tightly, watching the pale light fight through the grey. Behind her, Nathaniel sat still in the bed, bandages wrapped gently over his eyes. He reached for her hand. She gave it. "Emily," he said softly. "Yes?" "When this is over, whatever happens, I want you to know." He paused, but the sentence never finished. Instead, the nurse entered. It was time. Hours passed like years. Emily waited in the recovery room, her legs numb from sitting too long, her palms slick with anxiety. She replayed every moment, every lie, every truth. Every smile that wasn't earned, every moment that had become real. Would it survive the light? Finally, the surgeon emerged. "The procedure went well," he said. "There's swelling. His vision may be blurry at first, but he's waking up. You can see him now." Emily entered the room slowly, knees trembling. Nathaniel lay beneath a soft blanket, his face calm, serene. The final gauze was being removed. She watched as his eyes fluttered open, blinking, testing, adjusting to a world he hadn't seen in years. He turned his head slowly and looked at her, right at her. And he didn't flinch. He didn't squint or recoil. He just looked, not with confusion, not with betrayal, but with something gentler. Recognition. Emily's breath caught. She stepped forward. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Tears welled. Nathaniel sat up slightly, his gaze steady. "You're not Vanessa," he said. It wasn't a question, it was truth, delivered gently. Without anger. Emily choked back a sob. "No," she whispered. "I'm not," he exhaled slowly, and then he smiled. Not wide, not triumphant, just soft, real. "I know," he said. The hospital room was still, the quiet broken only by the soft hum of machines and the ticking of the wall clock. Emily stood frozen near the foot of the bed, her entire body tense with a question she hadn't dared to ask out loud. Now that he can see, will he still want me? Nathaniel blinked several times, adjusting to the bright overhead lights, the rush of vision returning in wave shapes, color, clarity. But his gaze never left her. She wasn't dressed in anything grand. No designer makeup, no perfect hair, just Emily plain, real and exposed, the way she had always been behind the mask. "You're not Vanessa," he said again, but this time more softly. Emily couldn't speak. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her hands trembled at her sides. Nathaniel sat up, his voice low and sure. "I've known for a while." Her breath caught. "You have?" He nodded. "Not right away. But there were things. Small things. The way you held your breath when I asked about Paris, how you placed my tea on the left instead of the right. The sound of your footsteps lighter." Emily took a shaky step closer, her throat burning. "You never said anything." "I was waiting," he said, "to see if the lie would fade, or if something honest would take its place." A tear slipped down her cheek. "And now that it has?" Nathaniel studied her. Really studied her, the curve of her shoulders, the uncertainty in her eyes, the strength behind the fear. "I still see you," he said. Emily's knees buckled, but she stayed standing, barely. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for the lie, for pretending." "For all of it." Nathaniel reached out, motioning her to come closer. She did. When she was near enough to touch, he took her hand, then raised it to his chest. "I never loved Vanessa," he said. "I loved the voice that sat with me in silence. The woman who described the garden not like a tour guide, but like someone who cared that I could feel it." "I wanted to tell you so many times," Emily said, voice shaking. "I know," he replied, "and I kept listening, waiting for the moment your voice would stop trying to sound like someone else." She looked away, ashamed. "I didn't know if I was enough, not compared to her, not compared to what you were promised." Nathaniel smiled faintly. "She promised status. You offered presents." Emily blinked through the tears. "So what now?" He paused, then stood slowly, swaying slightly as he adjusted to the weight of light and motion. His body had learned to live without vision. Now it had to relearn how to live with it. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've spent years imagining the world, people, faces. I'm not sure what's real yet." He looked at her again. "But when I look at you, I feel less lost." Emily covered her mouth, stifling a sob. He stepped forward, closer now, their faces inches apart. "I loved you without sight," he said. "Maybe now I get to love you more fully." She reached up and touched his cheek, her thumb brushing a tear that hadn't yet fallen. "And if you decide you can't?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Nathaniel gently took both her hands in his. "Then I'll leave with gratitude, because you gave me something more valuable than vision." "What's that?" "Honesty," he said. Even when it came too late. The next day, Emily returned to the Hale estate, while Nathaniel remained under observation. Everything felt different. The halls, the paintings, the quiet corners that had once comforted her now echoed with uncertainty. She no longer needed to hide who she was, but she also didn't know if she still belonged. She packed a small overnight bag, nothing dramatic. Just in case. If he came home and decided he wanted distance, she would respect it. She had always prepared herself to leave. What she hadn't prepared for was being asked to stay. 3 days later, the front door creaked open. Emily turned, expecting a staff member, or perhaps a delivery. It was Nathaniel. No cane, no assistant. Just him standing in the doorway, bathed in golden light from the afternoon sun. "I told them I didn't need an escort," he said casually. Emily rushed to him, half laughing, half crying. "Are you supposed to be walking alone?" "Probably not," he smirked, "but I've always liked to test boundaries." She stood in front of him, unsure what to say. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small book dog-eared, well-loved. "The one you were reading to me," he said. "I finished it." "You did?" "Twice." Emily's chest ached with something fragile and full. He stepped closer. "I didn't come here to claim anything," he said. "Not revenge, not explanation. I came back to see if you were still here." She looked up at him. "I am." "Then let's start again," he said. "No more pretending." She nodded, barely trusting her voice. "No more pretending." In the doorway behind them, a gust of wind stirred the curtains. The air was fresh, the light was clear, and the truth, once hidden in darkness, now stood in the open unafraid. They had come through deception, doubt, and silence, and what remained was something no eyes could ever fake. Real love, seen clearly at last. The days after Nathaniel's return unfolded like pages in a quiet book, nothing dramatic, nothing forced, just a soft rhythm of rediscovery. He had regained his sight, but what surprised him most wasn't what he could see. It was what hadn't changed. Emily was still there. Still rising early to make tea, still humming faintly as she moved through the kitchen, still pausing by the window when the morning light touched the ivy-covered walls. She didn't pretend anymore. She wore her hair loose. She spoke in her natural voice, steady, thoughtful, warm. And Nathaniel listened. Not because he was blind, but because he had learned that listening meant more than seeing ever could. They didn't speak often of what had come before. Not yet. The pain still lived beneath the surface, like a bruise that hadn't fully healed. But each day, they stitched together a little more trust through shared silence, casual laughter, and the smallest of gestures. Like the way she set his cup on the right now, or the way he always paused before entering the study, giving her space she didn't ask for, but deeply appreciated. One evening, they sat on the back veranda, watching the last of the autumn leaves fall from the trees. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, eyes following the wind as it played with the branches. "I used to imagine colors," he said softly. Emily glanced at him. "What did they look like in your mind?" He smiled faintly. "Not like this." She waited. "They were louder," he said. "Brighter, perfect. And now, they're softer, imperfect. But more alive." He turned to her. "Like you." Emily's breath caught in her chest. She looked down at her hands, twisting slightly in her lap. "You say things like that," she murmured, "and I forget how this started." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "I don't." Her gaze lifted, uncertain. "I don't forget," he repeated, "because remembering reminds me why this matters." Emily didn't speak. He continued, "You could have left a dozen times when I asked about the orchids. When I noticed your voice was different. When my family questioned everything. But you stayed." "I stayed because I felt guilty," she said, almost to herself. "Maybe at first," he replied, "but now, I think you're here because you want to be." Emily blinked back, the sting in her eyes. "I don't know what I am to you anymore," she admitted. "You're not Vanessa," he said gently. She smiled bitterly. "That's a low bar." He reached for her hand, letting his fingers brush hers before gently holding it. "You're Emily," he said. "You are the person who sat with me in darkness, not because you had to, but because you chose to." He paused. "And I'm choosing you back." Later that night, Emily found herself standing in front of the mirror, not out of vanity, but out of curiosity. For the first time in years, she wasn't wondering how to look like someone else. She was wondering if she finally looked like someone worth seeing. And in her own eyes, she did. Not perfect, but whole. In the weeks that followed, their rhythm continued. They cooked together. Emily burning toast, Nathaniel over-salting pasta, both of them laughing like teenagers rediscovering joy. They read to each other, took evening walks in the garden. She taught him how to capture moments with a camera. He taught her how to hear the difference between stillness and silence. And slowly, love stopped being a secret they tiptoed around. It became something they built, unspoken but solid, like a foundation beneath their feet. One afternoon, while they were sorting through old storage boxes in the attic, Emily pulled out a dusty photo album. "Is this yours?" she asked. Nathaniel took it from her hands, flipping it open slowly. Inside were pictures of him and Vanessa staged, formal, hollow. He closed it gently and set it aside. "That's a different life," he said. Emily hesitated. "Are you sure you're not mourning it?" He turned to her, his eyes steady. "I'm not," she nodded. "I just keep waiting for the part where you realize you could have had something easier, cleaner, safer." Nathaniel smiled. "And miss this?" He reached out and cupped her cheek. "You're not easy. You're not safe, but you're real." Emily closed her eyes, and for the first time she believed him. That night, she found a small envelope tucked under her pillow. Inside was a simple card. 2 words written in his handwriting. "Stay, Emily." No expectations, no conditions, just an invitation. To be herself, and to be loved exactly as she was. The first frost came overnight. Emily woke to a garden dusted in white, each leaf rimmed with the quiet edge of winter. It looked like someone had taken a paintbrush, dipped in silver, and swept it gently across the world. She stood at the window, arms wrapped around her waist, watching her breath fog the glass. Nathaniel was still asleep, his breath slow and even beneath the blanket. For once, he didn't stir when she moved. For once, she didn't want to wake him. They had been fine, more than fine in some ways. There were smiles, long walks, shared dinners by candlelight. A softness between them she hadn't known was possible. But something had shifted. Not dramatically. Not loudly, just quietly, like a door that had been left ajar suddenly clicking shut. And Emily couldn't explain it, not even to herself. Later that morning, she found him in the music room, seated at the old upright piano. His fingers rested on the keys, unmoving. "Are you playing today?" she asked, leaning against the doorway. He didn't turn. "Just thinking." "About what?" He paused. "About how music sounds different after silence." Emily stepped closer, carefully. "That's not always a bad thing," she offered. "No," he agreed. "But it is unfamiliar." His words hung in the air like unfinished chords. She sat beside him, not touching the keys, not touching him, just close enough to feel the quiet between them. "You've been distant," she finally said. "So have you," he replied, not unkindly. Emily nodded, accepting the truth. "I guess I've been waiting." "For what?" "For the part where all of this falls apart," she whispered. Nathaniel turned to her then, his gaze searching. "Why would it?" "Because good things don't usually stay," she said. "Not in my life. Not for long." He reached over and gently closed the piano lid. "Maybe they don't stay because you expect them not to." Emily looked away. "I don't know how to stop expecting that." Silence fell again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was weighty, honest, necessary. That evening, she ate dinner alone. Nathaniel had taken a long walk before sunset, needing space, he'd said. And Emily hadn't asked questions. She'd simply nodded. She picked at her food, the quiet pressing in around her like fog. The house felt colder without conversation, colder still without certainty. She thought about all the things they hadn't said, about how even love could stall if left unsaid too long. Was that what was happening? Had they reached the edge of something? Or was this just life? Real life, without the drama, without the chase. Just two people trying to live with truth after surviving a lie. When Nathaniel returned, he looked tired. Not physically. Just emotionally spent. He stepped into the kitchen where she was washing dishes and leaned against the counter. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She dried her hands and turned to him. "Anything. If I had never regained my sight, would you have told me the truth?" The question landed like a thunderclap in a clear sky. She didn't answer right away. He waited. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I think about that all the time. I want to say yes, but part of me was scared I would lose you the moment you saw me for who I really was." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "And yet," he said, "I already had." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I saw you long before I saw you," he replied. "In the quiet, in the way you listened, in how you never filled the silence just to escape it." He stepped closer. "But now that I can see, I think I'm the one afraid." "Afraid of what?" she asked gently. "That I'm not enough. Not like this. That you only loved me when I needed you more than you needed me." Emily felt her breath catch. It was the kind of vulnerability she hadn't expected from him, and it broke something open inside her. She took his hand. "I didn't love you because you needed me," she said. "I loved you because you let me see you, even when you couldn't see me." They stood there for a long moment. No kiss. No grand declaration. Just a quiet, mutual understanding that real love wasn't about always knowing the next step. It was about staying in the stillness, even when the music stopped. That night, they sat side by side on the living room sofa, the fire crackling softly in front of them. She read a chapter aloud from a novel he had chosen. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask for explanations. He just listened. And when she closed the book, he took her hand without a word and held it gently. Not as a statement, not as reassurance, but simply because he wanted to. Because some things didn't need to be spoken to be real, and some silences weren't endings. They were just the spaces between breaths. The pauses between heartbeats, where love could rest and grow and wait until they were ready to speak again. The clouds that morning were low and soft, like the sky had been wrapped in wool. Emily stood in the garden, her coat pulled close, watching a few stubborn leaves cling to the branches. The season was shifting again. So was she. She heard the creak of the back door and didn't need to turn to know it was him. Nathaniel walked slowly down the stone steps. His steps weren't hesitant, but they weren't purposeful either. They were the steps of a man who was carrying something inside he hadn't yet named. He stopped beside her, but didn't speak. She appreciated that about him. They could stand in silence without needing to fill it. But today she wanted to say something, because too much had been left unsaid. And sometimes, love wasn't just in the quiet. Sometimes it had to be spoken. "I didn't come here for you," Emily said, her voice steady. Nathaniel turned slightly toward her, surprised. "I came because of a promise, a favor I couldn't say no to. A voice that wasn't mine told you stories, made you laugh, built a connection with you. And when she ran, I was asked to step in and finish the performance." He didn't interrupt. He just listened. "That first day," she continued, "when I walked down that aisle, I thought I was walking into a lie. And I told myself it would only last a day, maybe two. Enough to fool the papers, sign the papers, and disappear." Her voice trembled now, but she didn't stop. "But I stayed." Nathaniel's jaw tightened just slightly. She turned to face him fully. "I stayed because something happened that I didn't plan. I started listening to your voice, not as a stranger or as part of some scheme, but as a person. A man, someone kind, someone broken, someone brave. She stepped closer. I stayed for the way you asked questions like you genuinely wanted to hear the answer, for the way you noticed things other people miss, for how you could sit in silence and make it feel like the safest place in the world. Nathaniel's eyes met hers, clear, steady, a little wounded, a little hopeful. And every day I wanted to tell you the truth, she said. But I didn't know how to tell it without losing you. He took a breath, let it go slowly. Then why tell it now, he asked. Emily smiled not brightly, but fully. Because I'm not afraid of losing you anymore. He blinked. I'm afraid of not showing you who I really am, of letting you love only the parts of me you assumed were real. She reached for his hand and placed it over her heart. I want you to love me with your eyes open, and I want to love you with nothing left to hide. Nathaniel's fingers tightened slightly around hers. You don't owe me anything, he said. I know, she replied, but I choose you. Silence fell again, but this time it felt different. Not heavy, not uncertain, just full. He looked at her with a softness that made her knees go weak. You stayed, he said. She nodded. I did. And now? I'm not going anywhere. Later that afternoon, they sat on the porch steps, sipping warm cider from mismatched mugs. The wind rustled the trees, and a flock of birds passed overhead, heading south. Nathaniel glanced sideways at her. You know, he said, I think I've always known you weren't her. Emily smiled gently. How? I could feel it in the way you were afraid to be loved. She looked down into her cup. I didn't think I deserved it. He turned toward her. But you do. She met his gaze. So do you. That night, before they turned in, Nathaniel pulled something from the drawer beside the bed. It was a letter. Folded, worn, sealed in a cream-colored envelope. My mother gave this to me before she passed, he explained. She told me not to open it until I found someone worth seeing. Emily's breath hitched. He opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. Inside was a single line in his mother's handwriting. You'll know it's real when you don't need your eyes to find her. Nathaniel smiled softly, folded the letter, and placed it back into the drawer. I guess I found her, he said. Emily's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. They climbed into bed, not as strangers, not as imposters, but as two people who had chosen to stay not for convenience, not for rescue, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And for the first time, love wasn't something that had happened to them. It was something they had built, piece by piece, in darkness, in silence. And now, in the light. 1 year later, in a quiet mountain town in Oregon, morning mist rolled over a silver lake, soft as breath on glass. Nestled beside the water stood a cedar-sided center with a wooden sign carved by hand, the touch of light. It wasn't grand. It wasn't meant to be, but it was exactly what it needed to be, a place for beginning again. Inside, laughter echoed through hallways painted in warm tones. Wind chimes danced gently by the windows, and in the heart of it all, Emily Dawson and Nathaniel Hale moved with a calm purpose that only healing could bring. Every morning, Emily led a group of children along the lake, path most of them blind, some since birth, others more recently. She didn't teach them how to see. She taught them how to sense through sound, touch, scent, rhythm, through trust. Sometimes she'd pause by the water's edge and ask, "What does the lake sound like today?" And every answer was different. Every answer was right. Because none of it was about being correct. It was about being present. Nathaniel taught music. Ironically, the man who once avoided it now found meaning in it again, not in technicality or performance, but in expression, in resilience. He had found that blindness had taught him how to listen, and now sight helped him translate what he felt. He didn't teach scales, he taught intention. "What do you want this sound to feel like?" he would ask his students. And they answered, sometimes with a note, sometimes with silence. They didn't call it a retreat, they didn't call it a recovery center. They simply called it home, because that's what it had become. Not just for them, but for the people who came there searching for light in their own ways. And no one there called Nathaniel a millionaire. No one called Emily the other sister. No one needed to. They were just Nathaniel and Emily. And that was enough. Far across the country, in a high-rise villa nestled above the Gulf Coast, Vanessa Dawson leaned over a marble counter, applying a shade of red lipstick out of habit rather than need. Her reflection in the mirror hadn't changed much. Still beautiful, still composed, still impossible to read. Behind her, her husband, a newly elected senator with perfect teeth and a powerful last name, sat in the living room, waiting for his tea. 4 months ago, a car accident had left him completely blind. Vanessa never mentioned the irony. She simply adjusted. Now she helped him dress, described the sunlight through the windows, guided him gently around corners, played the part, perfectly. Every morning, she made his tea just the way he liked it, 2 sugars, stirred clockwise, cup placed on the right. She'd learned that from Emily, though she'd never admit it. She would smile, kiss her husband on the cheek, and say something sweet. He would call her the light of his life, and she would smile again, but only for a moment. Because afterward, once the smile faded, a silence would settle. Not in the room, inside her. A silence full of everything she hadn't said, everything she hadn't become. Because Vanessa had won. On paper, she had the career, the money, the status. But every night, she watched her husband reach for her hand and miss. And every time he whispered, "You're the best thing that ever happened to me," she would wonder, who does he think I am? And would he still say that if he saw me? One afternoon, while she was preparing for a gala, her Bluetooth speaker chirped on the vanity. A voice read headlines aloud. Entrepreneur and humanitarian Nathaniel Hale awarded the International Humanitarian Award for his work with the blind community, alongside his wife, Emily Dawson. Vanessa froze. The lipstick trembled in her hand. She didn't cry. She didn't curse. She just laughed, softly, dryly, like something inside her had finally accepted that whatever she'd been chasing, it had already passed her by. She placed the lipstick down, poured the tea, and as she handed the cup to her husband, she leaned in close and whispered something only the wind could carry. "I'm not the light, my love. I'm just the shadow that stood in the wrong place." Back in Oregon, the day wound down gently. Emily sat on the dock with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching the water mirror the sky. Nathaniel joined her, placing a cup of cinnamon tea in her hands. They didn't speak. They didn't need to, because love, once real, doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need a declaration. It just stays, quietly, patiently, fully. Nathaniel looked out at the horizon, then turned to her. "You still wonder if I see you?" he asked, a small smile in his voice. Emily smiled back. "No," she said softly. "Not anymore." And with the last light of day painting the lake in gold, they sat together not as a performance, not as a lie, but as two people who had walked through darkness and learned that love doesn't always arrive the way you expect. Sometimes it comes after everything falls apart, and sometimes it begins the moment you stop pretending and finally choose to stay. In a world that often rewards appearances, this story reminds us that what endures isn't what the eye sees, it's what the heart recognizes. Emily Dawson stepped into a marriage built on deception, yet through quiet acts of care and honesty, she discovered a truth deeper than bloodlines or expectations. Nathaniel Hale, though blind, saw her more clearly than anyone ever had, not with his eyes, but with presence and trust. As we age, we understand more than ever that real love doesn't demand perfection. It asks only for truth, patience, and courage, the courage to be seen for who we are, not who we were expected to be. The journey of Emily and Nathaniel reminds us that redemption is possible, even after mistakes, and that healing doesn't come from pretending, it comes from choosing each other, day after day, in silence and in storms. For those of us who've known loss, change, or regret, their story is a quiet nudge. It's never too late to begin again. This time, with our eyes and hearts open,